the most important thing in making films is about figuring out what you wanted to say, and it's finding your own voice.
Our guest on this episode of Asians in Art is Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Violet Du Feng, a Guggenheim Fellow who documents the human side of China's economic transformation. We talked to Violet about The Dating Game, which premiered at Sundance in 2025 and which has just been released on streaming. The film follows three men from the countryside searching for love in a world that's forgotten them. We also discuss Hidden Letters, an Oscar-shortlisted film that explores modern womanhood in China through the story of a remarkable 400-year-old script. Welcome, Violet Feng, to Asians in Art.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have 15 films under your belt. The latest one I saw was The Dating Game, which we'll talk about a bit later. But also, Corinne and I saw your Hidden Letters too. So maybe we can go back to the beginning.
Okay.
How did you get into documentary filmmaking?
So really that I became a storyteller because I was a child journalist, and I became a journalist when I was started in elementary school. So I was writing stories, and by the time I was in high school, I had my own show on the radio stations for teenagers in Shanghai, so Shanghai radio. I'll write about crazy stories of how, kids learn to doze off with their eyes open during the middle of the class, things like that.
Life skills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's it was really popular among my classmates. So I just tell stories about them. But it was really until when I was in high school, I remember it was 1993. And that's the year that Shanghai was undergoing significant change. It's the middle of starting of urbanization, where, before the city was mainly Shanghainese, generation after generation. But that was the beginning of the year where so many migrant workers from the rural areas flooded into my city. And all of a sudden, everyone was talking about how they're afraid that the city is being taken over by them, by people who are, we call it full of
migrants.
Sweat and mud, and because it's also the same year Shanghai had its first line of subway. I remember in the summer Shanghai can be really hot and nobody has AC, but the subway does, so everyone flooded into the subway, including migrant workers. And then of course it's confined area, so there's this sort of smell that they just came out from the train, and then people are talking about it, and then they call them the taste of mud that they brought into the city, including me. I didn't know anything better. And then there was a documentary that came out, and that was probably the first documentary besides the propaganda films that you ever see on Shanghai television. And they just started a documentary program. And this amazing journalist who I look up to today, and then she lives in the same senior center as my aunt now, that she started, you can call it the very first cinema verite film. It's not really, it's still very journalistic. There's a lot of question and ask. But she basically followed this story of a migrant worker who came into Shanghai, was a woman, had this illegitimate child with a Shanghai resident who disowned the child. And so she had to file a lawsuit to prove that this is his child, to have him, take responsibility. And so she followed this whole journey, and it was 2 episodes. And after the first episode, the story blown up and everybody was talking about it. And so I live in this small alleyway, and my home is the first household that has TV even. So I remember my parents bring the TV out, and for the second episode release, and then all my neighbors came together, including me. We're all standing together in the middle of the alleys. We're watching this, waiting for the verdict of the court and waiting for the DNA test result, whether this is his child and what he's going to react to it. And I just remember the announcement was of course, he is the father. I mean, he's also a disabled man. So he started crying because he felt like he couldn't afford to raise this child. So he started crying. The mother started crying with this crying baby in his hand. For the first time, he looked at her like a father. And I just remember everyone was clapping, including me. And there's goosebumps all over my body. A sense of shame, the sense of guilt of how I was among everyone else, calling these people with such a condescending tone. And I realized that what emotional storytelling could do and can change people, and it changed me, and it challenged my own bias and stereotyping in such a profound way. And I know that this is what I wanted to do, because if that can challenge me and change me, and I wanted to change other people too.
So you went to university first in China, right? Was it Fudan University?
Yes.
What did you study there?
Journalism.
And you did study journalism.
Yes.
So you think that because documentaries are about, if not truth, a truth, do you feel that studying journalism is important to become a successful documentary filmmaker?
I think it's all connected, right? You know, journalism is storytelling too. I think the training of being a journalist, I think what I learned most from the college training is not really how to write, how to report, how to tell stories ethically, how to tell stories with integrity, but more so is how to connect to people with empathy.
When you finished university, was it a decision that you wanted to go to the United States, or did sort of life take its course and things happened and you found yourself in the United States?
So when I was in college, I did a really long internship with Shanghai TV, because that's a place, and I was so drawn to it and their storytelling. So I was, trying to intern at the documentary channel, and also interned at, the news divisions. So I did extensive internship there. But back then in China journalism, you have to take red envelopes in order to report.
What does that mean?
It means that whoever you're interviewing, they'll give you money. But if you don't take that, that means your boss is not going to get the red envelope too. So like it's sort of like a chain effect that everyone, it's sort of just like, even the driver who take you to scenes to film has to get the red envelope too. So there's part of that, but so I was actually hired by Shanghai Television. But by that time, I did an internship in the US at CNN. So I saw completely how journalism is practiced very differently, good and bad. But I rejected that job. And I remember till this day that I walk into the newsroom, the head of that, and he had this pile of interviews. He said, like I rejected all of those people, and I hired you. And I said, but I'm rejecting it. And he's like, how dare you to have the guts of rejecting us? And I didn't want to say that unless you don't let me to take red envelope. But I knew that I wanted to pursue and then to really be able to have the ability and freedom to tell the story I want to tell. So I decided to come to the US for graduate school. So I went to Berkeley for journalism. And it was there really that I was so exposed to different kind of storytelling. I was taught by John Ellis, who's really amazing filmmaker. So I was, my eyes was like wide open from day one. It's like, wow, documentary can be made like this. So
I had read somewhere though that there was the role that was played by this German pen pal that you have for like a number of years, and she was a really big influence in you making that decision to go to the United States.
Yes. Oh my God, how do you know that story? Because it's my next film.
It is? Okay.
Yes. So I'm making that film. Looking back, it's no coincidence that I think I became a filmmaker as someone from China. Like when you grew up in Shanghai at my time, you felt a sense of freedom, right? You felt like your immediate community, they're all part of who you are. And I was very happy, growing up, and I, was, doing a lot of after school curriculum. But there's always some part of me that I know, for example, the adults who were surrounding me, they all just went through cultural evolution, right? The sense of insecurity is something people don't talk about, but it's in everyone's DNA. That insecurity made people who are, in suppressive, societies that everyone can relate to, is a fear of something that you're not familiar with. It's a fear of going beyond your immediate proximity of who you're supposed to belong to. So I met this old German lady around same year when I was talking about the documentary that I was, watching on television, that she visited Shanghai, and I learned my English as a tour guide at this after curriculum center in Shanghai. So I give tours to Westerners, knowing that, I'm there to tell them how great our country is, how great, like the communist kids are, how wonderful our life is. Truly believe it, Met this old woman, I didn't know, like, because I met hundreds of those every weekend. And a lot of these foreigners after the visit would say that, oh, leave me your address, we'll be in contact. Nobody will be in contact with me. But miraculously, 2 weeks after one visit, I received a letter from Germany, and this place that's so remote and small village. And since then, we started writing to each other. And it was that relationship that really provided me an agency to be curious to others who are completely unknown to me and stranger to me, who I'm supposed to be fearful for, including these migrant workers, So I think it provided me an agency to know that how important it is to tell stories about the others who you're not supposed to care, because if you don't, then you'll never know who you are. So that's also why that I chose to leave my country and to know who these others are. And along the way, I figure out who I eventually am or who I wanted to be.
So talking about relationships that you had with this older German lady, it reminds me of the relationship between the young woman in Hidden Letters, Hu Xin, and then also He Yanxin, which I read that she had passed away last year.
Recently,
Last year.
Yeah.
Oh, she was so lovely.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about Hidden Letters.
这是我的村庄，几百年前，这里的女人被裹小脚，足不能出户。为了给彼此活下去的希望，他们创造了一种男人看不懂的文字，叫做女书。
有咱们说谁还那个没口语，这是一个年，俺那时候也来受苦个话的。
我给大家简单的介绍一下这一款女书主题手机。
这都是下个我们这个用的这个什么。
Yeah, I think in some ways, my German mom is my He Yanxin in my life. I think woman has a different way of looking at the world. My German mom, years past that we into the pen pal, that I learned that she was born in 1939, the year that the war started and her dad was drafted to the battlefront. And one thing her mom taught her, she was raised by a single mom, her mom taught her is to not to believe in propaganda. And that is why she decided to come to visit China after Tiananmen Square incident. And then she met me. So that's where that relationship started. And what we had, and I think, is how she kind of taught me and exposed with me and discovered with me this resilience of how we cope with the world. And I think when I started Hidden Letters, it was very much a time I went back to China. I got married. My husband and I met at Berkeley. He's also into social justice, but we went back because of his job, and then we had our daughter there. That was the time after 10 years away from China. I really realized how the society is going backwards in a way of how women are being suppressed again. We're experiencing really significant change of reproductive, political, and economic pressures as women. And that inequality shifted back, because my mom's generation, it was very much the time when the government pushed for the gender equality. And she really enjoyed that. And
she was a doctor, right?
She was a doctor. Yeah. She really benefited that. And I really benefited that too. I was raised by an artist dad. My dad's a musician and my mom is, a nurse. And so my dad was always, taught me that, my dream has no limit. Like there's always, what I can dream beyond what boys can dream. So I never thought that there's a limit for me as a woman to dream. But the war changed. I think it was coupling with capitalism and the revived patriarchal all combined together. It was a sense of stifleness that I felt as a woman, have a young daughter. When I was born, everyone have jobs in the state-owned companies, and every state-owned company have a free daycare. Right? So I basically started daycare when I was 50 days old. I went to work with my mom every day, day or night. That was all taken away when I gave birth to my daughter. And a lot of the women, because of economic issues, that they're chained at home to, be a full-time mom. And I was, that too. And but there's not a public platform that we could talk about this.
So you do pick up sensitive issues, right? And you're filming in China. So tell us a little bit about the process. I mean, how challenging is it to film in China?
Well, it's challenging in many regards. There is a regard about the production side of it because there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of censors that, it's really hard to film in public places. But I think that as a Chinese, you always know there is a rule, there's a way to adapt to the rules. So you film in guerrilla style, we always choose small cameras, very small crews. But as long as we have access to our characters, we film very intimately with the people that we're following. So we have a way to cope with that. And then there's also another challenge about, as a filmmaker from China, I tell stories about my country because I always firmly believe that changes has to happen from within. So not only that I tell the stories about China, I want the film to be seen in China. So, but that entails, significant challenges. It's not just on the surface about censors. When you release any film in China, you have to go through government censorship. But at the same time, it's about how you can have people receive the film, to understand it at the same time and wanting to have the urgency to feel there's a need for change, right? It's not something that's easy to communicate to people in China because everyone, is used to one kind of understanding of what the society is. And also, I think it's because they have not seen many documentaries before. For example, making Hidden Letters. I'm thinking about my audience being, generations of women in China, of how they're being indoctrinated by this patriarchal mindset, that we're all victims of it, right? It's about sort of not wakening up, it's too Western of a word, but it's more about how to kind of give you something to make you feel connected to it and understanding, resonate with where your situation is, at the same time make you feel like, oh, is that actually right of what I just accepted as my norm? So it's sort of planting seeds in that, but not in a kind of on the nose way.
Yeah, it's not combative.
Yeah.
Nuanced.
Exactly. And so that becomes my exploration of finding my cinematic language. And I think that to this day, after all these films, because not only I direct films, I also produce film. I made a commitment of producing films for female filmmakers from China, in the past 10 years. And we want these films to be seen. We want these films to be past censors. So how do you do the dance that's so nuanced enough that we can pass the censors? The people who are looking at it may not get completely what you're trying to say, but the people on the other end who are the audience might see it.
So going back to how you film it, just so that we can, people who are listening can understand, is that it's not just you pick up a camera and then you go and meet your characters. It's not like you just start filming something and then you say, oh, that would make a great story, let me film some more.
So I think making a film, at the end of the day, what it's most important is what you wanted to say with the film. And that also kind of connected to how you wanted to start a film, what's your intention, motivation behind it. And I always want to say that, and that intention, motivation is everything. And things could change because you're following real people's stories and you need to be open about how that unfolds, and then whether how you adjust to, what you wanted to say after what you have experienced and explored and discovered and seen and felt. But that seed of how you intended to make this film, what your intentions are, is gold. To me, because I wanted to speak to the people of the modern generation women who are going through the revived patriarchal society, and what kind of dialogue that I want to have with these people. So, to me, Nüshu is a vehicle. For people who don't know about this language, it's an ancient secret language created and shared only among women. And
for a particular area of China, right?
Yeah, that's in the Hunan area, so it's in central China, from hundreds of years ago. So back then, women have no rights to access to education. They have about feet and locked in a chamber room. So these women, in order to survive, I think really it's a survival mechanism that they created this language. It's a written language to communicate with their friends, their female friends, and to build a sisterhood in this language, so they can share their miseries, so they can talk about their sufferings, and they can also share about hope. So it's a woman's literature. Yeah. So to me, it's a vehicle of that language, of what it meant back to these women then, and how they found a way to talk about it, and how that language is being reintroduced today through the younger generation of women, so we can also talk about what our situations are. That's why from day one, I was very clear that my eyes is focusing on the younger generation who is taking over the torch of trying to revive this language, and also how to allow this language to come into their life to change the way of how they see the world as a young woman themselves.
So what I find about good documentaries is that, and you might find it quite delightful when you're following your characters, suddenly something that is not expected comes up.
Right.
And that may re-emphasize your initial motive. Like in the Hidden Letters, one of the ladies that is studying and trying to expose Nüshu to the modern era, she had a fiance.
Yes.
And I already kind of felt, while she was still engaged, and she would be, writing the Nüshu language, and she looked so happy when she was doing that. But when she was with her fiance, she just looked so not happy. And I thought, oh my God, I don't think she's going to stay with this guy. And then she ended up breaking up with him. But that was nothing planned, right? No. It just happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Originally was thinking that, oh, great that she has a relationship as the other character who's falling out of a relationship. So we can follow through that relationship to see really the dynamic between she and her fiance and going to marriage or whatever, and how they make decisions of having kids, and how, their understanding of roles, of gender is going to differ, and how they, talk about this. So that was like my initial idea. And then this all fell apart. That was not a plan of how we're going to follow the trajectory of her story, right? But, we didn't know that she had this, curator who's a female who really had presence in her kind of exploration of her work, combining Nüshu to explore her own female identity in today's China. So that then became shifted as the storyline there. Because they fell out of this relationship, and we saw certain things that's like red flag in their relationship. But I also wanted to, make sure that he's not just coming out as a bad guy, because he's a representative of millions of men in China, that they're also victim of the patriarchal mindset. That's why he come on as the one that he felt like he need to take responsibility of this family. He need to make plans for her about her life. He need to be the decision maker here. This is all part of the traditional kind of patriarchal mindset that's still affecting everyone today. So I don't want him just to be singled out that this is a bad guy and then she left him happy ending, all great. I want men to look at that to see that, oh, actually, I see part of me in that as well.
So actually, I just thought from the get-go that I felt that they were quite mismatched, because he had his responsibilities to the bigger family.
Right.
Which, brings me to the dating game.
豪哥，你有空帮我和一个一八九八去。
我叫豪哥啊，目前的话从事着情感导师这个行业，这个练技术你就需要大量的实战去练，
自己没那么好精力去搞这个得法，
在弱化你这个脸型的那个弱势，知道吧？
嘎吱窝都喷了，是你们表现的时候到了啊！
难道女孩子喜欢这么大的狗吗？
喜欢啊！哎，好，开心一点。
你晚上就一直刷就行了，一滑就是喜欢，知道吧？多滑一滑。
这里面跳，马力气，快，跑快点！白色衣服的快！
哎，你好，小姐姐，就是想认识一下，加微信可以吗？
当时是他加的我，
就是直接过滤掉。
我觉得大部分女孩子还是挺受用的。
比如
说，长得很漂亮。可是呢，我发现你有点像什么大熊猫，
不喜欢装，我就是这该怎样就是怎样，装啥嘛？聊天其实不重要，人重要。你是个什么样的人重要？
都是渴望成功。放下来，我是希望咱们每个人都能找到自己喜欢的女孩子。
One of the reasons that I'm really drawn to stories about gender is, like for Hidden Letters, I became a young mother, and I was at a crossroad trying to defining how I fit into the society too. But at the same time, I think, like looking at the larger picture, along the way of me making Hidden Letters, I became friends with Gloria Steinem and Robin Morgan, who became my like my mentor, my inspiration and all that. And one conversation I had with Robin Morgan is, we were talking about the fundamental importance of talking about gender inequality, because gender equality is fundamentally an indicator of where society's civil rights movement is. And the reason that we're telling Hidden Letters at a time where in conjunction where China is in terms of our civil rights, situations now, very much reflected in where the gender inequality is going progressed.
You mentioned capitalism as well. Do you think a session into the WTO really changed things in China?
I think commercial consumerism, capitalism play a big role in changing the economic equality. For example, that when women are academically is performing so much better, like everywhere else in China. But in workplace, when women having 2 kids, for example, are labeled unhireable, in corporate, in those places. So that's not heard of before. My mom's generation, that women's participation rate in workforce is the highest in the world. And all of a sudden, like we are going backwards. So I think that capitalism definitely play a role. But there's also, the reproductive pressure, right? Coming out from the one-child policy, all of a sudden that we have a birth rate plummeting in China. So they really want more kids. So now they're putting pressure on women to have 3 kids.
So the dating game was based on that idea of more men than there are women, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I think that what I was really drawn is that all these factors that, we talk about gender inequality, it's all these factors that's affecting that. There's political aspect to it, there's, technology, there's cultural aspect and the economic aspect to it, all affecting, the gender inequality, resulting in a huge gender divide. At the beginning of when I did Hidden Letters, these are not in the these discussions not in the public eyes. But it was around the time, I think a year or 2 years later, there's this incident about Tie Lianyu. I don't know if you guys follow. It's about the chain. There's
a woman who was chained. Is that right?
Was chained.
Oh,
so it was.
Yeah, I did.
It was in the same time as China's Winter Olympic happened, right? And I was on that story, and then everyone was so angry. But I think the anger behind it is that we didn't have an outlet to talk about the sufferings, the suffocations that I talk about as women, the regression of, not having the rights that we deserve and the freedom we deserve. And then this is the outlet. And that kind of story went so quickly viral.
Yeah.
And it's like one after another. So, around the time that I was finishing Hidden Letters to even now, these stories that as soon as you hit gender, like it went viral, like so quickly. But on the other hand, in the dating game, we talk about this game who's, women playing this game to date AI boyfriends, right? So in these games, the men are always, really hampering of the women and say whatever they like to say. But there's a counterpart, a version of men's game, which is men dating AI girlfriend.
Right.
And those games, the women are all gold diggers.
Oh.
The men are all like so frustrated with women these days because they are in demand that they can ask for more. So like a lot of these men are deprived the rights of finding love, like in the film. So they have so much anger towards that. And so in those games, it's very much feeding into their needs. So the women in those games are all gold diggers.
Right. And those 3 men in your dating game documentary, they seek the help of a dating coach.
Right.
And the first scene is when the husband and wife are sitting down.
Yep.
and having dinner, and she just looks like a picture of thunder. Like you can hear her anger through her sinus.
Yeah.
That must have been quite uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Is that day one of shooting?
It was day one of shooting. And that's also very much reflective of how divided, of gender in the society right now is. Yeah, I was in the room and I was like, oh my God, what just happened? Because, that was, like a couple of days after I just met her, even though we talked before. But I knew that they have differences in their approach of coaching, because both of them are dating coaches, and housewife is a coach only for women. But I didn't know that how that has pretty much destroyed their marriage, So the level of that kind of clash is not something that I had expected going in, for sure.
How many days were you filming them? In total, do you film a lot, or do
like a month? I would say, yeah.
I was going to say, do they see you as an outsider, or do they? I guess not, because they're very revealing on camera.
If anything, it's the opposite, because for the dating game, for example, the dating coach, it took us quite a while to get access to him.
Oh, I did.
Because there was an article a few years ago done by this journalist in the name of investigative journalism. However, he went into these kind of dating camps, first of all, without revealing his identity, but also didn't stay through the camp. So he wrote a really sensationalized article that went really viral, that almost killed the entire industry. So Hao was named in the article, and that was also why, reason that I found out about, this person. So he was really afraid of media because he felt like it didn't really being honest of what this camp is really about. So when I went in, he was very cautious. But his wife, saw hidden letters before. So, and I think that, people who have been in my film, they give me the trust, and I take that trust as a huge responsibility, because once the filming is done, their story is in my hand. Participants who are in documentaries in China face the kind of risk that people in other places don't face. They could lose their job, they could lose their freedom, and their families could lose their freedom, or could face risks as well. So I don't want to say that I know 100% how to protect them, because I don't, because the rules changes, the censors changes, the red buttons of where those are changes
they keep
all the
shifting,
time. They keep shifting. So I can only base on my judgment, my guess, and my estimation. For hidden letters, for example, one of the main protagonists, she was dealing with an abusive husband that she left, right? And basically asked her to have abortion when she was 6 months pregnant. But her ex-husband works in the government. And I even went to the government that her ex-husband was part of. And then we put so much parameters to make sure that this is not going to affect her. I think that, words get around. So housewife saw hidden letters and understood that. And because I also talk about, when we released it in China, so she was the one who convinced Hao that I can be trusted. So even though that I knew a lot of people in the West may not completely like Hao, and they're part of me, that it was just I can't deal with some of his techniques. But at the same time, I also wanted to, bring in the complexity of who he really is, because to me, if I just portray him as this, hitch, dating coach who's just only about pickup artists, then I failed him too, because there is a part of him who is really in the good, really trying to help these men, because he's from, one of these men as well. He's from the rural area himself. He's one of the left behind children, just as a lot of his clients. So he really understands who they are. So I think that bringing that complexity is very much my job, which he probably doesn't understand, but I think it's really important for me to tell that side of him.
I think it just shows that you are really caring of each person in your film, which is pretty impressive.
What I wanted to ask is you, in your films, you tie the countryside to the city.
Yeah.
For the two that I've seen, that is.
Yes.
It seems quite important for you to bring in both.
Right. The rural is very different from the urban. So in Hidden Letters, the importance of incorporating both sides. So that's why we casted one woman from the rural area and one woman from the city, because their struggles, their challenges as women in these different geopolitical representative areas are very, very different. But for the dating game, this is really a story for these millions of surplus of men. And most of these men who are surplus and really left behind by the society is because they're from these rural areas, particularly coupled with one-child policy, right? You know, because these are the areas who's really put an emphasis on they need boys. And so these boys grow up with no woman to interact with. At the same time, their parents are all working in the cities as part of the urbanization process. So they don't have role models of relationship, and also they didn't grow up with love, right?
We normally ask our guests as we approach the end of the interview, any advice for young filmmakers?
I think making film is a brilliant way of living, because at the end of the day, we're telling others stories to discover who we are. So I've learned so much. I've been inspired so much by people who came into my films, and they become part of me. I don't know any other way of living my life other than I really don't know any other way also. I don't know what I could do other than making films. One thing to tell all the young filmmaker is that everyone has a voice, and finding that is a gold piece of knowing how you're going to be a filmmaker and what kind of filmmaker you want it to be.
Wow. I loved it.
Very profound. Thank you so much, Violet, for coming on to Asians in Art.
Thank you
so much for having me.